All right, so I've been doing this. This is my 20th year anniversary in business. Started in 2001, making my living doing this, and it's been a blast. Written a lot of articles for magazines, sponsored by a lot of photo companies, and speak at a lot of photo conferences. And I've taught. I've been through basically every state in the country, even up into Alaska, teaching my macro workshops. So it's been a blast and I'm having a good time and still am. And it's really nice having these Zoom programs so we can reach out to camera clubs where you could not get to very easily without a lot of expense. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here. All right, you all see my first slide?
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so I'm going to start off with my equipment that I use. About 2 years ago, I went over to the mirrorless system. It's the Fuji X-T30 Mark II. And I don't know if any of you know a photographer and a long time, for over 50 years, has been in the photo business, Bill Fortney. Bill worked for Nikon for about 10 years, and I ran into him at a photo conference that I was speaking at. He was there with Nikon, and I was using the Nikon D7000 at the time. And he says, Mike, he says, I know you're using our D7000. It's a good camera, but how come you're not using the professional cameras that we sell? I says, Bill, about 60% of the people come through my workshops using cameras that are $1,000 or less. I said, if I'm using your $6,000 camera body, those people leave my workshop saying, well, Mike's got great images. He's got a professional $6,000 camera. I says, I use those cameras. All my cameras I purchase are under $1,000 or right around $1,000. And it's to prove to those people that you don't have to have an expensive camera for macro photography. I could literally take a $500 entry level camera and produce excellent images. Now, that's not to say that my camera would be a good choice for other types of photography that maybe require maybe high frames per second or, very high ISO with low noise. Depending on the style you shoot and what you shoot, you may need to spend more money. But for macro photography, you don't have to have an expensive camera. So when I got my Fuji mirrorless camera, I contacted Gary out at Hunt's Photo and I says, what do you got that's under $1,000? And he says, the XT30 Mark II is $899, so that's what I ended up with. And it's been a great camera, and I'm doing real good stuff with it. Now, what I like about the mirrorless system, obviously, it's half the size of that's my D7500 Nikon up above, and it's like half the size of that camera. It's amazing when I got this little camera, I thought, wow, this is gonna be hard to get used to this little body, but over time, I have grown to love this smaller body. And now when I pick up the D7500, it feels like a tank. Now, we don't really save much on the size of the lenses because the sensor in both of those cameras is the same. It's a C sensor. And so you still need the same size lens to produce the image on that sensor. So the only people that really save on lens size would be the Olympus and the Panasonic. They use the mirrorless 4/3 or something like that. And so they use smaller lenses for their cameras. But the Nikons and the Canons, Sonys, Fujis, they're using the C sensors and bigger sensors full frame, and they use larger lenses. Now, as far as macro lenses go, they come in short range, mid range, and long range. Now on the short focal length, over on the left there, you'll see a 60. That's a Tamron, Sigma, Nikon, and Canon. But Sigma is actually a 50 millimeter. They don't have a 60, they have a 50 millimeter. On the mid-range, on the low end is the Tamron 90, which I've used for many years. And then you have the Canon 100 and the 105. You have the Sigma and Nikon. And in the telephoto, on the low end would be the Sigma 150. The 180 was always the most popular in the telephoto macro lenses, and that would be a Tamron, Sigma, and Canon. And then the longest of the true macro lenses is the Nikon 200. Now, if you went to buy any of these at a camera store right now, you'd find that pretty much all of them are discontinued. I contacted Gary at Hunt's Photo. I says, what do you sell in macro lenses for a DSLR camera? And that's all he has is a Canon 100 and a Nikon 105. Tamron, who sponsored me for years, has literally not one macro lens in their lineup of lenses. They've all discontinued the DSLR macro lenses, and so it's very difficult to find any of those new unless you find a camera store that might have an old one on the shelf still. But this not to say you can't get any of those lenses, but you're going to have to go to the used market. You're going to have to go to eBay. You're going to have to go KEH, or even a lot of the camera stores take in used equipment. So you can find some of those lenses at the camera stores used. Now, I asked Gary, I said, so what do you sell in macro lenses for mirrorless cameras? And he has a whole bunch of those. And this was over a year ago, so I imagine they've even expanded past what you see here. But my point is that it seems that all the companies are getting away from DSLR. They're going into mirrorless, and they're really heavy into that. And so it's getting harder and harder to find lenses for the DSLR cameras compared to the mirrorless cameras nowadays. Now in the upper right corner, that is a 60 millimeter macro lens on the camera body, and I'm going to photograph a rose of Sharon flower. Now that flower is a pretty good size flower, and I want to fill the frame with that flower. So I took the picture with the 60 millimeter, and you'll see it in the upper left corner there. Now, the image below that one is a little longer lens. You can see that's a 90 millimeter Tamron. And in order to get the same framing, the same exact picture, like I did with the 60 millimeter, I had to back away with the 90 millimeter. So with that 90 millimeter, a little extra focal length, I've gained what we call working distance. So I've gained some working distance between me and that subject by using a longer focal length macro lens. Now in the bottom image, that's a big lens. You can see how big that is. That's a 180 macro lens. Now, in order to get the same framing again, like I did with the 60 millimeter, you see I had to back away quite a distance from that flower to get the same format, same framing. So why is that important? Well, let's say that that was a live subject like a dragonfly, butterfly, or any type of bug. I'm going to want that great amount of working distance, because if I'm using a 60 millimeter and I'm 12 inches from its face, it's probably going to fly away. So the telephotos tend to be more for the bug photographers, people shooting live subjects. And the 60 millimeter I don't recommend for outside because you have to get so close to everything. Most people use it for tabletop photography when you're shooting indoors and that. And in my workshops, I would say at least 80% of the people that come to my workshops are using lenses in the mid range, the 90, the 100, the 105. And the reason why those people end up in those mid range ones is because of the price range. See, when you're talking a telephoto macro lens, you could be up in the $1,300, $1,500 price range. And a lot of people don't want to spend that much on a dedicated macro lens. Now, the mid ranges, back in the day, you could get them for $500, $600, $700. So that's why most people end up in my workshops with the mid range, and they work fine. If you're just shooting a lot of stationary subjects, things that aren't moving away, mid ranges work just fine. And that's what I've used for many, many years. Now they came up with these zoom lenses that said they have macro capability. Now this happened about 10 years ago. And what they did was they took the zoom lenses and they created a zoom lens that would focus in very close to subjects. So the ones that I use is the Tamron 18 to 400 on my DSLR Nikon. And then for my Fuji, I use the 18 to 300. What I like about having this wide range, 18 to 400, 18 to 300, is that if I want to show an environmental shot where like I'm out here in this swampy area photographing leaves floating on the water, and I want to show that for displaying for my workshops and that, I can put one of those lenses on another camera on a tripod, set the self timer, walk out there and get a picture of myself with 18 millimeters wide to show that landscape. And then if I'm in a botanical garden, and I have subjects that are 3-4 feet in from the pathway that I can't leave, then I can always use my zoom to zoom in on them. Whereas with a true macro lens, fixed focal length, like a 90 millimeter, I'd have to literally walk in there to get close enough to photograph that subject. But zoom lenses are so nice to be able to zoom in from a distance away. If I'm in the wintertime, I'm out in streams shooting ice abstracts at the edge of streams. Again, I can't walk on that thin ice. It's new ice, and I would break through. So I can stand on the edge and use my zoom to zoom out. And this was actually shot with my 18 to 400 at the Chicago Botanical Garden. It is a small cactus flower. So you can see these lenses will allow us to focus in really close to our subjects. Unlike the old zoom lenses from back in the day, where you would have to use extension tubes to allow your lens to focus in close. Now these lenses will do that automatically. So my 18 to 400, my 18 to 300 will shoot as close as 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. That's a pretty small area, 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. Now, 90% of what I photograph is larger areas than 1.5 inches by 2 inches. So this pretty much takes care of everything I do. So I rarely take my macro lens when I go out to shoot anymore because these lenses will get in to the ranges I need to get into. So I don't really have to have a macro lens anymore. Now the macro lens will get it even closer. It'll shoot down to about 7/8 of an inch by 1 3/8 inches, so much smaller area. But I very rarely shoot anything in that small area. The tripod I use is made by a company called Vanguard. You may see on the top of my hat, Vanguard. I use the VEO3 Plus 263AT. And what's so nice about this tripod is that it has a center post that rises straight up and then it goes into a horizontal position. So you can see there's the center post in a horizontal position. And that allows me to get over top of subjects when I want to move my camera out and get over top of a subject. Now, that's a feature that Manfrotto's had on their tripod for many years. But the problem with the Manfrotto is when they go into a horizontal position, if they want to move that camera now closer to the subject or raise it up away from the subject, they have to do with all three of leg adjusting all three of the legs, which is hard to move that tripod up and down with the three legs. But with the Vanguard, it has a little lever on the side here. You release that lever and that center post will lower or raise up. So that really is a nice feature of the Vanguard. Now, it's also the ability to move that tripod out of your way when you're shooting a flower so it's not directly in front of you. And then it also has the ability to take the legs straight out. All three legs go straight out. You can literally put the base of the tripod right directly onto the ground. And with the center post extended out, I can put that camera as low as I want to the ground. And so that'll get me real low to subjects if I need to do that. The other nice feature about the VEO series when they came out, they have one of the legs will unscrew from the tripod. You can put the head on top and you have a monopod now. So let's say you go to a botanical garden and they say, sorry, you can't bring your tripod in. Well, you can always unscrew one of the legs, put the head on top of it, and they'll let you bring a monopod in typically. They just don't want the three legs sticking out where people are going to trip over them. Most of you probably use a ball head of some sort, and a ball head has a big metal heavy housing as the base, and then it has the ball in the top, and then you'll see there's a little U slot in the front right up in here, that little U slot. Now, landscape and wildlife photographers don't typically use the U slot because they're shooting straight ahead all the time. See, macro photographers use it a lot because they're shooting down towards the ground many times. So we will have to work within that little U slot, and then we'll have to pivot the ball head back and forth. So it's a little bit limiting. I mean, it can be done, but it's a little limiting. Now, the head that I'm using is made by a company called Acratech, Acratech, and it's called the Ultimate Ball Head. And it is the ultimate ball head for macro photography. This is the ball head. And now you can see they've cut away all that big metal housing, so it makes it super lightweight. Also, it's made out of aluminum, which also makes it super lightweight. Now, the key to this head is they've cut away this front area of the ball head, totally cut away, which allows me to move my camera into any angle, any position I need to go to frame up my subject. It makes my life so much easier than having to work at a U slot and pivoting the ball head back and forth. So I can just set up my tripod and move my camera any place I need to go. And one thing about macro photography, you are being constantly maneuvering your camera into all kinds of positions for framing your subjects. Not like landscape wildlife, we're just shooting straight ahead all the time. We are constantly maneuvering into all kinds of angles and positions. So this head makes my life a lot easier. Now that tripod I just mentioned, it's not very expensive. It's about $229, so it's not an expensive tripod. The ball head runs a little more. It's a little bit pricier. It's about $369 for this version here. They do have some other higher end ones than this one here that run up into the 400, 450. But I use the lowest price of the ultimate ball head, and it's about $369. So it's an excellent lens. It can be used for any type of photography, not just macro, but it really stands out as a macro ball head. Now, as far as accessories go, there's a lot of little minor accessories you carry, but I always want to make sure you know about the most important accessory, and that's a diffuser. Now, this is a Dame's rocket flower. You may see them sometimes on the side of the roads growing big patches of purple flowers. And if you look at this group here, now you can see the petals on the top portion look more like a pink color. Um, and the problem is they're not pink, they're actually purple. Now, when we're out shooting, light's going to be an issue sometimes. Now, if it's a sunny day, it's going to be kind of harsh light, might wash out some colors. But this was actually shot on a cloudy day. This is on a day when I have an overcast sky, and you would think, well, how are you washing out your colors on an overcast sky? Well, when we are shooting subjects that are running parallel to that sky, you're still getting enough reflection and intensity of light off those white clouds that will come down and will wash out colors on certain days and certain subjects. So what you want to do is have a 12-inch diffuser with you at all times. And I use the 12-inch, even though they do carry 20 and 22-inch versions of this diffuser. But I like the 12-inch because it collapses down into itself, and it's about 4 inches wide when you collapse it into itself, and then you put it in your pocket. And typically I'm shooting small areas, and that 12-inch diffuser has always worked real well. Now, once I put that 12-inch diffuser directly over top of that Dame's rocket, the color comes back to the natural purple it's supposed to be. So you can see on the left, that's no diffuser, image on the right with the diffuser. And again, this is a cloudy day when this is happening. So that's a very, very important tool. We want to make sure we have our natural colors when we shoot our subjects. Now, on that same cloudy day, I'm walking down a pathway and I look to my left. I remember seeing this leaf. Now, look at the top of the leaf. Colors washed out. And then again, that's the area that's running parallel to the sky. Now in the front of the leaf, you can see that's dipped down, so it's 90 degrees to the sky and it retains its color, but it's that top portion that's running parallel to those clouds. So once I put my diffuser over top of it, I can bring some of that color back on the top. Now, the color on the top is not quite as dark as it is on the front, but at least there's color there to work with in post-processing, so I can darken that top portion up to match up with the front of the leaf. All right, but if all I have is the image on the left with no color, I got nothing to work with. So I'd have to delete that image. So again, very, very important tool. Now, that's what's happening sometimes on a cloudy day, but what happens on a sunny day? On a sunny day, I'm going to diffuse my subject 100% of the time. Hear that? 100% of the time. I am never letting that sunlight hit whatever I'm shooting. I'm diffusing everything that I shoot. Now, there's three things that happen when sunlight hits your subject. One, it can alter the color of the subject depending on the day. Early morning, late evening light is warmer than midday light, so it can have an effect on your color of your subject. It can add shadows. Sunlight can add shadows in parts of the subject that you're shooting. You may not want shadows in there. And then also it can wash out colors, depending on the day, time of the day, it can actually wash out some of your color on your subject. So there's three bad things that happen. Now, the image on the left here is a sumac branch, and that is early morning sunlight right at daybreak hitting that leaf. And you can see the leaves are kind of a yellowish green, but they're not supposed to be a yellowish green. And you can also see a couple minor shadows here. Nothing, not a big deal, but sometimes you're shooting a subject, you get a lot of shadows, but there are just a couple minor shadows there. Now, once I put the diffuser between the subject and the sunlight and shade that subject, then you see the image on the right side, that is the natural color of the leaves. And also, if you notice, there's no shadows on these two little leaves right here. So again, it altered the colors. That sunlight altered the colors of those leaves and also created a couple little minor shadows there. Now, that's why I say whenever I'm shooting in sunlight conditions, I'm going to diffuse my subject 100% of the time to maintain the color and eliminate any possible shadows in my subject. All right, now sometimes you're going to be indoor shooting because, with macro photography, we shoot indoors a lot. And you may be shooting a subject that has a little sheen on the petals of whatever it is you're shooting, like this little succulent here. And you might get little hot spots, little white spots from the glare when the light hits it. So you might use your diffuser indoors. Now, some people say, well, could you use a polarizing filter on the front of your lens to eliminate that? You could, but the problem with the polarizer, it doesn't work 100% of the time. See, polarizers have to be at the right angle of the light in order to work properly. So when I started 20 some years ago, I did try polarizers, but they didn't work all the time. A diffuser works all the time, 100%. So a diffuser is going to cost you far, far less than buying a polarizing filter. Now you're wondering, do I have to hold this diffuser by hand all the time? Well, you could hold it with your hand, but you could also get a clamp, which would be your like assistant when you're out there shooting. Now the clamp, as you can see, has a large clamp on the left side, a flexible tubing, and then on the other end, another smaller clamp. Now, when you're out shooting, in this case, I'm shooting a little butterfly weed right here, a little flower of a butterfly weed, and I am in really close with my lens. So I could attach, as you can see, the clamp on the leg of the tripod, and then on the other end, it'll hold my diffuser for me, so I don't have to hold it, and I can just work the camera. Now, let's say that I'm using an old telephoto lens and I'm back 3 feet from there. That clamp attached to the leg of the tripod doesn't have a long enough flexible tube to reach out and put the diffuser over top of the subject. So what Wimberly did, the manufacturer of the clamp, they came up with a stake system. So now you can see I have a little plastic tube here, a hollow plastic tube, and there's a screwdriver that is inserted up inside of that tube. Now, when I want to make it into a stake to stake it in the ground, I pull the screwdriver out, reverse it, put the handle into the hollow tube, and then the shaft of the screwdriver becomes the shaft of the stake. So then I stake it in the ground next to my flower, and then I can clamp onto that with my clamp system. So I clamp on the stake and then adjust my diffuser over top of the flower. And now I'm independent of it and I can move the tripod around or move it back farther if I need to. So that's a great system. The diffuser with the clamp and the stake works real well. Now on their website, they also show that you could stake next to your flower and you could clamp onto the stem of your flower, and that'll keep the flower from moving back and forth in case it's a little breeze, a little windy that day. So that's another feature of the lamp. Camera settings. So on both my D7500 Nikon and my Fuji X-T30 mirrorless, I have my ISO set at 2000. And I'll kind of explain why it's set there a little later. Now you could shoot in manual mode or aperture mode for macro photography. Either one works just fine. For many, many years, I was taught when I started, shooting manually. And so I would do my manual, adjust my f-stop and adjust my shutter speed. But a lot of times I just have aperture priority and all I have to do is set the f-stop. Now, when I started in 2001, I would go to the florist and buy some flowers and bring them home. And I would shoot on my stairway, as you can see here. And the reason why I'm on my stairway is because that's a 2-story high foyer at the front of my house. And there's a massive window on the second floor that lights up that stairway with beautiful natural light. It is the brightest place in my home. The light seems to just kind of wrap itself around the subjects when I'm shooting there. And that is the best place, like I say, for light. So that's why I end up shooting there all the time. Now, the problem is shooting indoors is obviously I don't want stairs as the background behind my flowers. So I have to put something behind there. Now, when I first started shooting, I was using white backgrounds and black backgrounds, and all my images were coming out, my flower images are coming out with white and black backgrounds. And it got to be where it was tiring seeing that and a little artsy for me. So I wanted to produce an image indoors that looked like I shot it outdoors, and I wanted some kind of a natural background behind it that would make you think I shot it out in a field somewhere or in your garden or whatever. So what I did was I started creating my own backgrounds, and how I did that is I went out to the local parks. Now you could do this just on the grass on your backyard, anything green, green grass, or I like to go out to the parks and shoot though. So set up your tripod. If you have a macro lens works the best for this. I have tried it with my zoom. It works pretty good, but the macro lens seems to work better. So what you do is set up your tripod, set up your camera. I want you to set your f-stop at the smallest f-stop number. So it could be a 2.8 or a 3.5, depending on your macro lens. So I want to focus on the subject, focus on the grass, and there's the grass that I'm going to photograph, and just to show you what it looks like when it's in focus. Now, when you are manually focusing, this is what you want to be doing, manually focusing. When you manual focus and get your subject in focus, you know that if you slightly move the focusing ring left or slightly move it right at the focus point, it starts to go soft. It starts to go out of focus. So you take your focusing ring and rotate it, a few turns to the right and then go the opposite way to the left. My lens, it works best when I go to the left. It'll actually blur that grass out to a solid color when it's totally out of focus. So when you get it out of focus, you photograph it and you end up with that right there. So that grass that you see right there, when the lens is taken completely out of focus, ends up with that right there. So you just photograph it while it's out of focus. So now I have a natural green, as if I shot something out in the field and I blurred out the grass in the background, it would be that solid green color. Now, let's say you're looking at that thinking, well, I don't like just a solid green. I'd like to have a little bit of texture, a little blotchiness in there. Okay. So here's another subject. And instead of taking it completely to a solid color, I just rotate my focusing ring until I get it to where it looks good. And I photograph it and you end up with something like that. So, a little bit more kind of blotchiness, I call it, or a little bit of texture in there. So it's not just a solid color. Now you want to shoot a lot of different subjects. So here I'm shooting some grasses with yellow flowers and brown grasses, and I'm going to get more of a kind of a yellowish brownish green. And here I'm shooting some pink flowers with some greens, and I get pinks in my greens. And then this is another from a botanical garden, some flowers I was photographing and just taking them out of focus and getting shades of colors. And you'll want to have a lot of different colors, little different shades, so that when you're shooting your flowers, you try to find some complementary color as a background to your flowers. Now, let's say that you're lazy and you don't want to go out and make your own backgrounds. You said, I'm not going to do that. You can go to the hobby stores like Michael's Crafts, Hobby Lobby, um, Joann Fabrics. They all have a section in their stores for scrapbookers. So people that do scrapbooking. And in that area, you're going to find a long row that's dedicated to backgrounds because scrapbookers need backgrounds. So I bought a couple of these books at Michael's Craft, and you can see on the left side, this book has all solid colors, different solid colors. There's 58 sheets, and it comes in a 12 by 12 inch size. And over on the right, you can see there's more kind of like abstracty type designs that are on these more artsy looking papers. And again, 58 sheets, 12 by 12. And I don't remember exactly what I paid, but they weren't too expensive. So here's a couple out of that book that I showed you that has kind of the patterns that are designed into the backgrounds. And they kind of resemble what I'm doing by taking my lens out of focus. So it is kind of similar. So if you don't want to go out and make your own backgrounds or photograph your own backgrounds, you could always buy them at one of the hobby stores. Now, if you are going to print your own, let's say you go out like I do and I photograph them and I come home and I want to print them, you want to use a matte paper, okay? Don't be using semi-glosses or lusters or glossy papers, because when you use those, if they're angled just right, sometimes the light will come down and hit it and cause a glare on there. So you want to use a matte paper because there's no sheen on that paper. It's a dead flat. All right, so matte paper is good. Now you want to also back up these prints. You just don't want this floppy print. So you're going to have to put a backing on these prints. And so I use matte board, foam core, or cardboard. Matte board, obviously, for what we use for matting our pictures when we frame them. Foam core is what they put on the back of a picture, a photo to frame it. And then cardboard is another option. So anything you can do to attach that to stiffen up that print so it's not flopping around. You're going to want to also get carpet tape. Carpet tape has adhesive on both sides of the tape. So you want to get some carpet tape, and then you'll take and cut your background, same size as your print, lay it on the floor, and I cut 4 strips of carpet tape and I put them across like you see here. And then I pull off this side here and it exposes the adhesive here. Now you can take your print and lay it on top and it'll stick on there and never come off. I will tell you this though, when you go to lay that print on top of that backboard, you better make sure it's aligned perfect, because if you get a little crooked and you want to pull it off to reposition it, you are literally going to tear that print apart trying to get it off of that tape. It's that sticky. It's really, really sticky. So you got to really be careful as you lay it right down, get it nice and flat and perfectly aligned. How do I avoid the wind? Well, my method is get out of bed early. I am an early riser. I'm up at 5 o'clock in the morning every morning. Matter of fact, this morning I was up at 4 o'clock. So I get up real early, and what I do is I typically look at the weather report, the long forecast of the weather report, and I try to find the days that it is cloudy, because I would much rather shoot on a cloudy day than a sunny day. So I look at the week coming up and I say, okay, Thursday is going to be a cloudy day. I'll plan to get up and look outside in the morning on Thursday. And when I get up on Thursday, I look out in my backyard, I look at my flowers. Now, if my flowers are all dead still and they're not moving, then I'm going to be heading out to the park that morning. Um, I usually leave in the dark, and I time it so I get to the park right at daybreak, right when the light is starting to hit the ground, um and there's no wind. See, early in the morning you get the least amount of wind or no wind on most days, okay? And so I usually can shoot for about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and then once the air starts to heat up and starts moving, all of a sudden the flowers start moving and the subjects that I'm shooting are moving. So then I'm heading back home. So if you get out there at daybreak on those mornings when there's no wind, you will get a couple hours of windless shooting, and it's beautiful. It's much better than going out later in the day and dealing with the wind blowing everything around. Now, if I happen to get up that morning and I look out on that Thursday morning on that cloudy day and I see my flowers blowing around, I am not going out. I'm not going to deal with the wind. I'm just going to stay home and wait for another day. So that's how I avoid the wind, is getting out early at daybreak, because it's just too windy later in the day when the air starts moving. Clutter, that's one of the big problems for macro photographers when they go out into the fields and into the botanical gardens, and even in your backyard, you've got a lot of clutter around your subjects you want to shoot. Here's a couple of really nice subjects right here. These two coneflowers, one over top of the other. That's a really nice little shot right there. But look what I got to deal with, all that clutter in the background. That's nasty. And that detracts from my beautiful subject. We don't want that. We want a nice clean background with no distractions behind it. Same with this here. These are prairie cone flowers. And again, trying to shoot any of these, you're going to have all this massive clutter around it. And that is one of the big problems for macro photographers. Even in botanical gardens, when you go to the botanical gardens, everything is very tightly packed together. So if you're trying to shoot some subject, you're going to have clutter in the background. And many times it's multiple subjects in the background. This is a farm. It's about 50 miles north of Detroit. It's in Emily City. It's called Ankley Family Farm, and they have acreage of sunflowers. They have rows and rows and rows of all kinds of flowers, and it's kind of a you-pick flower farm where people come there and they cut their own flowers and take them home, put them in their vases. So they allow photographers. They love having photographers come in there and photograph, and they charge you. They used to charge you $5. I think they might have raised it to 8 this year, but that's a really cheap price to get for all the flowers that you get to shoot there. So it's beautiful, but again, very cluttered. As you can see, if you're going to shoot any of those flowers in those rolls, there's going to be lots of clutter behind it. So what I do is those backgrounds that I showed you how to make that I'm using indoors. Well, guess what? Now we're taking them outdoors. So we can use them outdoors when we're shooting, and we eliminate the clutter behind our subjects. So you can see here, I've got a pair of flowers, nice little pair of flowers, and all I do is put my background behind it. And I can, my style of shooting is I want everything in focus from front to back, side to side, top to bottom. I like it all in focus, and I can do that by shooting that f/32 and get that all in focus on those two flowers, and then the background is nice, clean background for me. Here I am in my backyard shooting a fern that just popped up, and I put my background behind it, and I can get everything in focus by shooting at the f/32, and I don't have to worry about what happens behind it. See, when you're shooting in clutter, you can't be shooting at f/32 because you're going to get all that details of that clutter behind it. And so a lot of photographers, what they do to try to eliminate, soften out that clutter behind as they shoot at the smallest f-stops. The problem is they get very little on their focus on their subject. Yeah, they blur the background, but they don't get enough focus on the subject. These are lily of the valley flowers. In the spring, they pop up, and I have a big problem because they are so cluttered. And I got my background popped up there, and you can see there's the plamp. Remember the plamp that held the diffuser earlier? Well, now the plamp is holding my background for me. So all I really needed the background for is just this little area up in here, just to clean up that area right there. I liked the composition, liked everything about it, but I didn't want the clutter back here. It would just take away from that composition. So a lot of times I just hand hold them, but you can use that plamp system like I showed you on the last one. Here I am up in Madeline Island. I'm holding the background and the diffuser for this lady photographing their flower. Now, you don't have to have your background cover the whole area where you're shooting. You just really need to have it cover the area that you're going to crop out. So I don't really worry too much about getting in and getting a perfect framing on my subject anymore, because with these large megapixel cameras, I can shoot larger areas and crop out what I want. So I don't get too fussy on the framing anymore. I just get a basic framing around the outside. I put my background and I look at it and I go, make sure the background is the area that I want to crop out. And then I can just crop out those two flowers out of there. Same with this guy, these lupin flowers. Again, you can see I've shot a larger area, but that's okay because I know I'm going to crop out what I want in post-processing. And same with this lupin here. Just crop out what I want. And this one, crop out what I want. So you don't have to get real fussy on making sure it covers the whole back of the frame. All right, now print sizes. I have a backpack that you see here that has an opening which is designed for sliding in a laptop or a notebook. And what I do is I use that opening for putting my backgrounds in there. Now that particular backpack only carries a size of an 8.5 by 11. So I use an 8.5 by 11 for that backpack. And that generally works for most of my flower photography. 8.5 by 11 works pretty well. Now, if you have a larger backpack with a larger opening, then you could, bring larger prints. I sometimes will carry a laptop bag. I bought a bag with a strap that's made for laptops, and it handles up to an 18-inch laptop. It's the biggest one I can find, and that way I could put little larger prints in that bag, and then I just carry it on my shoulder with the strap, and I open it up and pull out my backgrounds when I need them. Fill the frame. So let's say that you're out shooting and you don't have a background with you, or maybe you left them at home, or you just don't have any yet. The other option is to get in and fill the frame with the subject, and by filling the frame with the subject, that eliminates the background, okay? So this is an agave. I shot it out at the San Diego Botanical Garden, and what I saw on this was that S curve in this one right here. All right, that little S curve. And I noticed these leaves in the background. I thought, you know what, if I get the right camera angle, I can get that nice S curve in the foreground, and I can get those leaves filling in the background. And there it is. So that is that S curve I just showed you, and the leaves of the plant fill in the background. Yeah, this is another plant. This is at the Mathi Botanical Garden run by University of Michigan out in Ann Arbor area. And if you're shooting subjects like this, you could actually just zoom in on the inside of one of these leaves and pull out a nice abstract pattern. Or you could find 2 or 3 leaves or 4 leaves that are side by side, and then you can go in and zoom in and fill the frame with those leaves. So this way I've eliminated any of the background by zooming in and filling the frame. This is a century plant at the Mathi Botanical Garden. And if I was to shoot in the upper parts of this, I would have all this cluttery grass stuff back here. But I'm going to go down in here where there's a neat little abstract pattern and pull out that pattern right there. So again, I've eliminated the frame, or I'm sorry, the background by filling the frame. I was out in the desert outside of Phoenix, Arizona, and I saw these 2 palms, one in front of the other. Again, if I'm shooting outside here, I'm going to have all kinds of clutter. So what I do is I zoom in right in here, and I end up with that shot there. So just the front and the back. Flowers, a lot of the larger flowers you can zoom in and capture. and they fill the frame, and that way you're eliminating the background and not having to worry about backgrounds. Now, let's say that you can't get into, the small area that you want to capture, say like this flower here. Again, with these larger megapixel cameras, I really just want to get inside of the flower here, but I don't have to because I can shoot a large area and crop it out in post-processing. Just crop it later. Same with, any flower, if you can't get in close enough to fill the frame, shoot a little bit larger, crop it out in post-processing. This is I call it a spiral stairway, but shot at the Chicago Botanical Garden. And this is a King Solomon flower plant or something. But again, fill the frame with the leaves and the water drops. And yeah, just get in there and fill the frame. Then you don't have to worry about the background. All right, diffraction. Now you guys been hearing me talk about F32, and if you've been into cameras long enough, you know that, well, that is an issue when you're shooting at F32 because you get what's called diffraction. Most people will tell you never, never shoot over F16 because you're going to get too much diffraction in your images. Most people say shoot it around F8. That's the least amount of diffraction out of the lens. Sharpest quality out of the lens, shoot at F8. Works real well for landscape photographers, wildlife photographers, but not for macro because it's got such shallow depth of field at F8. Now, inside of our lens, we have an aperture that opens and closes. On the left side, you'll see this is your typical 2.8 on most macro lenses. And when you're shooting at 2.8, you get this wide open aperture inside the lens. It's open as big as it can get. It's what we call shooting wide open. But here's the issue. When we're only going to get the little guy in focus, but we don't get any of the background in focus because there's too much shallow depth of field going on at 2.8. If we go to F4 and 5, 6 and F8, 11, 16, 22, 32, as you can see, as we go to the larger numbers, the aperture inside the lens shrinks down to a smaller and smaller and smaller opening. And if you notice in the top, as we go to the bigger number, we get more depth of field. You can see in the little pictures up top, the background becomes more and more and more in focus until we get to F32, we get maximum depth of field, everything in focus. All right, so here's the problem with what I call the diffraction that we were talking about. When you're shooting at F32, you have that very small little opening inside your lens. Now, when you're photographing your subject, the light that is coming from that subject, entering into that lens, it travels down that big lens, and all of a sudden it gets to this little opening, this little aperture opening. Now, the light has to bend and squeeze itself through that little opening to get to your sensor. And so as it's squeezing itself in there, the light rays or whatever are shifting around, and when it hits the sensor with the image, it causes softness in the details. It's not very sharp when it comes out of the camera. It's a little softness in the details. So that is what they're talking about when they tell you don't shoot at F32 because you're going to get that soft diffraction. Now, this is the great thing about digital photography is that all software programs offer us a sharpening program. Photoshop has unsharp masks. I think someone said they have something called Smart Sharpen. They got clarity. Nik Software has Sharpener Pro program. Topaz has their Sharpen AI program. And Smart Photo Editor, which I use for my processing, has sharpening filters. You know what they make sharpening programs for? Sharpening your images. Yeah, exactly. So when I get these little slight softness in my images coming out because of the diffraction at F32, I can take them into my post-processing and sharpen them and make them look as sharp as an F8. All right. So that is a great thing that we have where we can correct that problem with the shooting high f-stops and getting the diffraction. So this is a sunflower. I shot up the Ankley farm in Emily City, and I am going to crop it. I'm going to do a little enhancing on the color and sharpen it. Now, if you look in the details, all the fine details in here, you can see around all these little areas here, they're soft. That is the diffraction that's caused from shooting F32. But by shooting F32, I maximize my depth of field so that all of that subject is in focus from front to back, top to bottom, side to side. That's what I want. So I'm always shooting at f32. Now, when I take it into my smart photo editor and I crop it, do a little color enhancement and sharpen it, I end up with that right there. So I get the sharpness that I need from the sharpening filters. And so all the areas in here that you saw that were soft in the last image are all nice and sharp. Now, I don't know if you can see this on the screen there very well, but in these petals here, there's little green lines in here. All right. Now, when you look at the other original image out of the camera, it's blurred. You can't see those lines very well. You wouldn't even realize they're there, but the software can identify those lines, pull them out and sharpen them, and they look beautiful. So again, don't worry about shooting at f32 because you're going to have a program in any of the software programs going to have some kind of a sharpening tool in there that you can sharpen your image. This is another sunflower. This is a shy sunflower. It's just opening up. But again, you can see it's soft. It's not real sharp coming out of the camera. Even there's little hairs all along here, but they're hard to see. But they're in focus, but they're just hard to see because of the softness of the diffraction. But once I run it through my sharpening, crop it, color it, there it is. Very sharp now. Very sharp. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I don't like to sharpen them too much because our eyes don't necessarily see things that sharp. I tend to like it really sharp. So for me personally, I tend to do a lot of sharpening on my image. But you can see all the veining in here, all the details. You can even see all the tiny little hairs that are on the edges of these leaves right here. Again, on the original image, you can hardly see that, but when you utilize that sharpening software, it finds all that and sharpens it really, really well. This is a dahlia. I shot this at the Chicago Botanical Garden a few years back, but you can see very soft in all the details, and the edges of the lines of the petals are all somewhat soft, so not very sharp coming out of the camera, but it gives me the maximum depth of field to make sure everything of that flower is in focus. And then you can see on the right side, that is the sharpened version right there, and everything is tack sharp now. All right, so don't be afraid about the sharpening tools. There's a ornamental cabbage with a little seed head alongside of it covered in dew, and I can sharpen that up real nice. So that's why I use a high f-stop number, is because in macro photography, close-up photography, we get very shallow depth of field when we're in really close to our subjects. So I'm going to demonstrate here with this ruler. That ruler, as you see, is on an angle to the front of my lens. And some would say, well, why don't you get parallel over top of it? Well, you could, but there's going to be times when you're shooting subjects where you can't always get parallel with your subject. So you're going to have to shoot on an angle, and that's going to increase the amount of depth of field on that flat subject there. So when I'm shooting at a 2.8, smallest f-stop of my lens, all I get in focus is one tiny little eighth of an inch. That's it, one tiny eighth of an inch. But over on the right side, the f32 gets the whole ruler in focus, all right? So that's what I'm talking about. I want maximum depth of field so I can shoot at those high f-stops to get everything in focus. All right, now this is a peacock feather. I've got it on the table just like you saw the ruler. Got the front of the lens on an angle to the peacock feather. Same setup, just put a peacock feather down. Now, people say, try to shoot at f8 all the time because you're going to get the least amount of diffraction and the sharpest quality out of your lens shooting at f8. The problem in macro photography is f8 doesn't give you enough depth of field when you're in really close. We lose so much depth of field when we move that camera close to that subject. So you can see all I really get at an f8 in focus is this little tiny strip across right here. That's it. That's all I get. And everything else is out of focus. Now, let's go up to f22. So you're thinking f22 is still a pretty big number. I mean, it should get, should get it all in focus at f22. It can't even get it all in focus at f22. Even at f22, as big a number as that is, I'm still not in focus here and still not in focus up top here. All right, so I go to my f32, I get it all in focus. And that's why I'm shooting f32. I make sure that everything I shoot, I'm getting maximum depth of field. I have no chance of getting something that's going to come out a little soft. If your lens only goes to 22, it's not going to get the same amount of depth of field I get on my 32 lens. Now, I always thought, because I never owned a lens that went up to only 22. All my lenses always went to 32, all the Tamron lenses I've owned. And I always just assumed that a f/22 lens at f/22 would get maximum depth of field and give you everything in focus, just like my f/32 lens does. But I bought a Fuji 18-300 lens and use it on my Fuji mirrorless camera and found that I was not getting as much depth of field with the f/22 lens. So I've gone back to only using my f/32 lenses because I'm not getting the same amount of depth of field. Now, this is a very interesting book. You need to go to Amazon and buy this book. And it's about a very famous photographer, Ansel Adams, one of the most famous of all landscape nature photographers. I mean, every photographer has heard of Ansel Adams, and even people that are not photographers have heard of Ansel Adams. Everybody knows who he is, the most famous of all. There's another photographer named Edward Weston that was in the same time frame as Ansel Adams. They were friends. And Edward Weston and Ansel Adams started a camera club, just like your camera club. They started a camera club out in California. And there was only about 10 people when they started the club. And the name of the club was Group F64. Group F64. There's this little insert that I pulled out of Amazon on the left side there. It says their name, F64, they took from a very small lens aperture used with their large format cameras, a pinprick that allowed them to capture the greatest possible depth of field in their lustrous, sharply detailed prints. So Ansel Adams, the most famous of all photographers, was shooting at f/64, a high f-stop to get maximum depth of field. And that was their philosophy of this camera club. We want everything in focus, just like I'm telling you, I want everything in focus. And so they were shooting f/64. Buy the book. It's on Amazon, a very interesting read, and you'll learn all about their club and how that all came about. So here you got Ansel Adams shooting at f/64. So don't tell me I'm crazy. All right, so you don't need to focus stack. Now, I read this all the time. I'm on Facebook and I'm on all these groups and stuff, and I hear people talk about, oh, I can't seem to get enough depth of field. And then someone says, oh, well, you have to focus stack. Nobody can get enough depth of field unless they focus stack. Well, I just got done telling you, you can get it in focus by shooting f/32. The problem is everybody's so afraid to shoot at f/32 because of that diffraction. But again, we have a tool to correct that. We correct all kinds of stuff in post-processing. We correct exposures, we correct contrast, we correct colors in our image as well. You can correct the sharpness in your image with the sharpening programs. So I tried focus stacking many, many years. When it first came out, I did a little experiment and tried it and thought it was a lot of work, a lot of hassle. And I thought, you know what, this is a lot of work and a lot of hassle when I can get it done with one shot at f/32. Why should I go through all this hassle of focus stacking? All right, now there's some problems with focus stacking that I don't like. Now let's say that I want to photograph this Gerber daisy on my stairway, but I don't have a background to put behind the flower. But I want to blur that stairway out. I want to get that kind of softness in the stairway so I don't have all the details of the stairway back there. So I'm going to have to shoot this at a small f-stop number. Remember on the ruler, 1/8 of an inch in focus, you get that lot of blur. So I can blur those stairs out by shooting at the smaller f-stop numbers. Now, first of all, I have to, in order to focus stack this, I have to measure that flower from the front of the flower to the back of the flower. Now, there is 3 inches in that Gerber daisy from front to back. Now, there's a depth of field calculator that it's an app that you can download onto your phone. And it'll help you with how much depth of field you're going to get at what f-stop you choose and how close you are. So you open your little app in your phone and it says, how far are you away from the subject? And I go, well, I'm about 6 inches away from my subject. Then it asks me, well, what is the f-stop you're going to choose? And let's say I decide to use an f4.5. So I put it f4.5 in, and it tells me that I am going to get 1/4 of an inch in depth of field when you're in that close. So now I got to figure out 3 inches of depth, and I only get a 1/4 inch depth of field. How many shots am I going to have to take through that flower to get each quarter in focus? Well, there's 12 quarters in 3 inches. So I'll have to focus on the very front of the flower first, and I'll get a little 1/4 inch in focus. Then I have to focus a little deeper, so I get the next 1/4 inch, and then the next 1/4 inch, and go all the way through 12 shots to get 12 shots, each one at a different focus point throughout that flower. Now I got to take those 12 images and I got to download them into a program. You could use Helicon Focus, you could use Zareen Stacker, you could use Photoshop. Even Photoshop will allow you to focus stack images. So that program will take a look at those 12 images, going to take the sharpest part of each one of those images, merge it into one fully focused flower with a blurred background. So that's what focus stacking is all about. But it's a lot of work where if I put a background behind that Gerber daisy and shoot at f32, I'm going to get it all in focus with one shot. And I don't have to go through all that hassle of focus stacking. Now, the new technology, they're starting to put focus stacking into cameras now. So I know Olympus has it, and I was just talking to a guy yesterday. He has a Nikon camera that has built-in focus stacking. And he says, you know, I can say how many images do I want, and I can up to 100 images it'll shoot. So all he has to do is set up the camera, focus on the front of the subject, and the camera will actually do all the shots, all the focus stacking of the shots. So that's new technologies that you could do it with that. Now, I'm not sure on his Nikon if it merges the images in the camera into a fully focused, or he has to take the images out and put them in his software. I think the Olympus, someone told me theirs actually stacks them right in the camera so it comes out fully sharp. And so that's a good feature. That's nice. It can if your camera can do that. Here's the other issue. I'm shooting indoors right here. No wind. Go outside, and if you have anything moving that subject, that's a huge problem. And most of you are going out in the daytime to shoot, and you're going to be dealing with wind, unless you get up early in the morning like I do and go out when there's no wind. But it's very difficult in the daytime to get a subject to stay still enough so you can shoot multiple images of that subject. So I find that I can just use a background behind my subject, shoot one shot at f32, and I get it all in focus. It's so much easier and less hassle. All right, now let's talk about the opposite end of f32, 2.8. What do we get shooting at 2.8? Well, there is a style that many photographers like in macro photography, shooting flowers with soft focus, dreamlike look. You know, it's a real popular style amongst macro photographers. Not so much popular when you show those images to your family and friends because they don't understand why you'd want so much softness in an image. Now, most people like to do it with a lens baby. Lens babies, they think get all this really nice soft focus on that subject. And there's some women that are very well known, Kathleen Clemens, Jackie Kramer, Ann Belmont, Jerry Jones, that exclusively shoot their flower photography with lens babies, and they get the very unique look that the lens baby produces. So I tried lens babies many years ago when they first came out, and I thought, you know, this is interesting, but I can do the same thing with my macro lens. So this is an image that was shot with the lens baby, and this is what I'm talking about, that soft focus, soft shot, you know, just soft colors, soft edges, and kind of a dreamlike state that you're looking at it. Again, and when I show these to my family and friends and that, they look at them and go, why is it out of focus? What the heck's wrong with this? And their thing is that they shoot with camera phones and they shoot with their point and shoots. And when they photograph things, they get it all in focus with those systems. And so they don't understand why you have an expensive camera, expensive lenses, and your images are out of focus. So it's not real popular amongst non-photographers. And even in my workshops, I would have people say, you know, I brought some of these soft focuses into my monthly meetings competition, and the judges would say, well, you know, I wish you had a little more in focus. So even the judges who are photographers didn't seem to understand this style. But again, a lot of macro photographers really like this. Now, as I just said, I can get the same effect with my macro lens by just shooting at 2.8, my smallest, you know, my smallest f-stop, 2.8. Remember that little ruler, 1/8 of an inch? Well, I get that basically 1/8 1/4 inch in focus when I'm shooting 2.8 and really close to a flower. So this was shot with my macro lens. And where I focus is I shoot, typically I always shoot into the side of the flower because there's a lot more depth from the front to the back when you're shooting into the side than it is if you shoot straight on. Then it's pretty much a flat subject. So I will focus on the petal that is closest to the front of my lens, which is this one right here. And with that 2-point aperture, I'm only getting a very, very little in focus. And then you can see how it's softened down the petals behind and eventually blurred into a solid color in the background here. So here I am with my little Gerber daisy. And what I do is focus on the very front tips right in here, very front tip. And then I shoot it at a 2.8 and I get just the tips in focus and it softens the flower. And look at the stairs in the background, blurs those stairs right out. All right, so just my tips are in focus. Now, I like to have the foreground of my subject in focus because when people look at your image, they're going to look for something in focus. And if it's in the foreground, they spot it right away. And then you get that softness going into the flower, into the background. So this is a Himalayan blue poppy shot at Longwood Garden out in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. And you can see where my focus is right here on the edge of the petal. Those are the closest to the front of my lens. And then you can see how it softens the petals in the background and softens everything in the back to a solid color. Now, if I was to change my focus point and focus into the center of the flower in here somewhere, watch what happens to the foreground. Now I got a massive blur in the foreground. See, I don't want that. It's not appealing looking at this giant blur in the foreground. So that's why I want my foreground in focus and then soften into the flower. So here's another one. Focus again right in here and soften into the flower, blur out the background. This is an orchid. Focus right on this, soften into the foreground and background blurs out. And there's another one right there is the tip of the petal that's closest to the front of my lens in focus, softens into a shades of colors and focus right in here. Softness in the, so all you get really is just some lines and some shades and tones. And again, it's a real popular style amongst macro photographers. But again, outside of the macro photographer world, most people don't seem to get it. This guy here, just focus right on the front petal here, right on the edge right there. And there it is. There's the focus right here. So shoot into the side of the flower, focus on the petal closest to the front of the lens. It'll soften that out. Now you can also alternate your f-stops. You can shoot at the 2.8 or 3.5, depending on your lens. And you could go up to an f4 and a 5.6, and maybe you get a little more depth of field. Maybe you want a little extra depth of field. But I tend to do most of all these at the smallest f-stop. Now lighting, what do I use for lighting? I don't use any lighting. I don't use flash. I don't use, any external lights typically, but I just use whatever light is available, whether it's outside or even indoors on my stairway. I'm just using the natural light. I'm not using any flash systems or anything like that. So it makes it so much easier than using a flash. Okay, guys, that's my program. Everything I taught you tonight, you can go out and shoot fabulous macro photography. Obviously, I concentrate on flowers a lot because that's what most people shoot, but you can apply the same thing to any type of subjects, other subjects you shoot. If you're interested, I had a macro photo club I started about 5 years ago. Has over 280 instructional videos, covers about 100 videos of me in the field, shooting subjects in the fields. And then there's videos on post-processing, videos on composition, and videos on equipment. I have now over 2,800 members from 29 countries in the club. It's a lifetime membership of $99. You only pay once, you never have to pay again. If you're interested, go to my website, tinylandscapes.com. And when you get to the website at the top, you'll see some links and just look for the Macro Photo Club. You'll also see a workshop link there. You can look at some of my Zoom meetings that I have coming up in the future here soon. Woo! All right. I am going to stop the share on my screen and come back to you guys. All right. So if you got any questions, I'd be more than happy to hang around and help you out if I can.
Question? Hold on a minute. We're going to try and, oops. We'll try several different methods. Can you hear with this?
Yeah, I can hear.
Hi, Mike. You didn't much about extension tubes. Do you use those at all, or what's the...
No, because the extension tubes would allow my lens to focus in closer, and I'm already getting in close enough. Let's say that you had a macro lens and you wanted to extend it past 1:1 magnification into 2:1, 3:1, 4:1. You could put extension tubes between your macro lens and your body, and that would allow the lens to focus in closer to the subject. But I'm already getting in close enough, so I don't really need extension tubes, so I never use them. Oh, one thing I want to point out too before we go on, I forgot to mention on that 2000 ISO, I told you I'd set my cameras at 2000 ISO. Some of you may know that when you're shooting at that high f-stop, your aperture openings in your lens is very tiny, so it doesn't allow a lot of light to come through there. And so you can end up with some longer exposures when you're shooting at f32, especially if you're in maybe a dark woods shooting or something like that. So that is where the 2000 ISO comes in. Even with f32 and dark woods at 2000 ISO, I'm still getting pretty fast shutter speeds. I mean, 1/30th of a second, 1/60th of a second, but fast enough to capture my subjects with no problem. In the old days, in the film days, I shot with some Velvia um, slide film, and it was a 50 ISO, and I would be out there in the dark woods, and I would get 15-second exposures, sometimes 30-second exposures, but that doesn't happen now by raising your ISO up to that 2000, and I get clean images on both of my cameras shooting that 2000 ISO. So, okay, next question.
I have a question. Do you always shoot with a tripod?
Yes, always. And it's mainly because I'm shaky. I'm not very steady with a camera hand holding. So I have to be on a tripod. Now, there are some photographers that I know that shoot handheld, but they typically are shooting at smaller aperture numbers. And so they have faster shutter speeds so they can handhold without, losing any softness, from shake. But with me shooting f32, it'd be almost impossible to handhold it and get sharp images. So I have to be on a tripod at all times. So 100% yes.
Do you use a remote shutter release or your timer, um,
Yeah,
the
good
timer where
question. Good question. I tried remotes and I just didn't like having to carry an extra piece of equipment, and fish it out of my camera bag and all that. So I use the self timer that's built right into the camera, and I have it set for 10 seconds. Because when you press that button on the camera will have a little bit of movement in it, and that 10 seconds allows it to settle down, and so it's very steady, and it'll fire the shot for me. And then also, by using the self timer, I can press the button, and then it gives me time to walk over and put my background behind my subject that I'm going to shoot. And so that gives me 10 seconds to get my subject behind or my background behind the subject. And that works real well. And then I don't have to carry an extra piece of equipment and worry if it's going to fail or not work.
Any other questions? One over here, hold on.
Mike, do you do other things other than flowers?
Oh,
Because
Mike.
I've got one of your books at home that I collected at a program I saw you in person, and
Yep.
there was tons of stuff in there, beautiful stuff.
Yeah, if you go to my website, you'll see all kinds of different subject matter that I shoot. What I find is that most macro photographers, if they're not shooting bugs, they're shooting flowers. And if you go to my website, you'll see all kinds of plant life and different things that I photograph. Seashells and feathers and all kinds of things. So yeah, there's a ton of different stuff you can shoot out there. But I find that flower photography is the most popular for macro photographers, so I tend to teach more on that. And I do some other programs that when I do my boot camps and that, I get into much more on all the other subject matter that I shoot. But yeah, go to my website at tinylandscapes.com, or you can go to mikemoats.com, and it'll show you all kinds of different types of subject that we shoot. Like right now, the milkweed pods are starting to pop, and you go out there and shoot the pods with the milkweed seeds popping out of them. So that's good stuff. And then we're going to have fall colors, fall leaves coming out. I'll be shooting leaves and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff to shoot other than just flowers. Mushrooms are going to come out in the fall here.
Any other questions?
I guess I covered it so well, huh?
All right. So you want to say anything?
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
We have to have the camera.
Yep.